In the dim light of a grey Chicago morning, the bustling city seemed to carry on with its frenetic pace, unaware of the life that was about to be uprooted. A police siren wailed in the distance, echoing off the cold asphalt streets. It was on such a morning that the city would lose track of a boy whose disappearance would haunt it for decades. In 1987, Chicago was a city of contrasts, glittering skyscrapers towering over neighborhoods struggling to get by. It was here, amidst the whispers of the windy city, that we meet 11-year-old Tommy Grayson. Tommy was the kind of kid who wore his heart on his sleeve, a wide-eyed dreamer in a hand-me-down jacket, his sneakers scuffed from adventures along the city's cobblestone paths. Tommy lived with his mother, Sarah, in a small apartment on the city's south side. Sarah worked double shifts at the local diner, trying to make ends meet after Tommy's father left them when he was just a toddler. Despite their struggles, there was warmth in their home, a bond unbreakable by the harshness of life outside. Tommy was known in the neighborhood for his generosity, often seen sharing his lunch with other kids at school. He had a smile that could light up the darkest alleyways and a laugh that resonated like a beacon of hope in a world that often felt unforgiving. But on a chilly September afternoon, everything changed. Tommy had been playing in the park near his home, a place where the rusted swings creaked with stories of children past. It was here that he was last seen, his figure a small silhouette against the backdrop of the city's sprawling skyline. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah began to worry. Tommy was always home by dinner, eager to recount the tales of his day. But that evening, his seat at the table remained empty, his untouched plate a gut-wrenching reminder of his absence. Panic set in as she retraced his usual path, calling out his name into the night. His friends hadn't seen him. The park was empty save for the echoes of distant laughter carried by the wind. With a heart pounding like a drum in her chest, Sarah reached for the telephone, fingers trembling as she dialed 911. The operator's voice crackled through the receiver, calm but indifferent, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within Sarah. "My son," she stammered. "He's missing. Please, you have to help me find him." And so it began, the mystery of Tommy Grayson's disappearance. An 11-year-old boy vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and an aching void in the lives of those who loved him. As the city slept, oblivious to the silent cries of a mother searching for her son, the seeds of a cold case were sown. What happened to Tommy Grayson that day? Who was the woman who took him in, and why? These questions would linger unanswered as the hours turned into days and the days into years. But for now, as the night swallowed the city whole, one thing was certain. A boy was missing, and the story of his disappearance was only just beginning. The Chicago night was heavy with anticipation as the clock ticked past midnight. Within an hour of Sarah's frantic call, 2 officers arrived at the Grayson household, their demeanor more procedural than personal. They listened as Sarah recounted the events of the evening, her voice quivering with fear and uncertainty. "Ma'am, do you have a recent photograph of Tommy?" one of them asked, his pen poised above a notepad. Sarah nodded, quickly retrieving a school picture from the mantel, a snapshot of innocence, his smile wide and eyes bright with the promise only a child could possess. The officers exchanged a glance, all too familiar with the protocol. "We'll file a report," the second officer assured her, "and we'll notify all units. But I need you to know, sometimes these things work themselves out. Kids wander off, lose track of time." But Sarah's instincts screamed otherwise. "He wouldn't just wander off," she insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "He's a good boy. He wouldn't leave without telling me." The officers made their way to the park where Tommy was last seen. The swings swayed gently in the night breeze, empty and eerie under the streetlights. A few scattered pieces of litter skittered across the pavement, but there was no sign of the boy. As dawn broke over the city, the initial search team expanded. Volunteers, neighbors, and friends gathered, driven by a shared sense of urgency and community. They combed through alleys, backyards, and abandoned buildings, calling out Tommy's name into the stillness. Yet, the first 48 hours passed with no breakthrough. The investigation, already strained by limited resources, was plagued by early missteps. Witness statements were taken but not prioritized. A crucial tip from an elderly man who had seen a woman leading a boy away was mishandled, filed away with a stack of less pressing leads. Back at the precinct, the officers were inundated with cases. Tommy's disappearance just another file in a teetering stack. The urgency of those first hours began to wane, swallowed by the sheer volume of work and a pervasive sense of resignation. Meanwhile, Sarah's world was unraveling. Each passing hour felt like a lifetime, each minute a reminder of her son's absence. The house felt hollow, the silence a deafening echo of a life interrupted. She took to the streets herself, clutching flyers with Tommy's picture, her eyes scanning every face in the crowd, hoping for a miracle. But the city, vast and indifferent, swallowed her cries. And as the second day turned into night, it became clear. Tommy's disappearance had slipped through the cracks of an overwhelmed system. The community's initial fervor began to falter, the urgency dulled by the relentless march of time. Yet, in a small corner of the city, a woman watched the news with growing interest. Her heart heavy with secrets untold, she knew something the rest of the city did not. The boy was safe. For now. But the question lingered, a shadow over the unfolding mystery. Why had she taken him, and what would happen next? As the story of Tommy Grayson's disappearance continued to unravel, the city of Chicago remained oblivious to the dark undercurrents swirling beneath its surface, the truth waiting to be uncovered. The morning of the third day dawned in Chicago, casting long shadows over a city still waking up to the reality of a missing child. At the precinct, Detective Marcus Jennings sat at his desk, rubbing his temples as he reviewed the scattered notes from the initial hours following Tommy's disappearance. The phone rang incessantly, its shrill tone a constant reminder of the chaos unfolding. The first 2 days had been a blur of frenzied activity, the kind that leaves details slipping through the cracks. Jennings wondered if they had missed something vital in the rush. He glanced at the whiteboard cluttered with names and times, a chaotic web with Tommy Grayson's name at its center. Meanwhile, Sarah Grayson sat in the waiting area, her eyes red and swollen from tears she could no longer shed. She held on to hope with a grip that was both fierce and fragile, replaying her last moments with Tommy in her mind. Her husband, Mike, sat beside her, a silent pillar of strength, though his eyes betrayed the turmoil within. The initial police response had been swift but not focused. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, speaking to anyone who might have seen something, anything. But in the confusion, crucial details were overlooked. An elderly man, Mr. Peterson, had approached an officer with a vague recollection of a woman and a boy near the park. His words, distractedly jotted down, were lost in a sea of paperwork. Jennings knew they were racing against time. He called his team into the briefing room. "We need to retrace our steps, go back to those first hours. Every lead, every statement, we treat it like gold. It's time to dig deeper." As they pored over the case files, a sense of dread hung heavy in the air. The city's media had picked up on the story, but without new developments, the news cycle threatened to move on. Jennings felt the weight of the clock ticking, every second a reminder of their narrowing window to find Tommy. Back at the park where Tommy was last seen, volunteers continued their search. Among them was a young woman named Lisa, a local waitress who had taken a personal interest in the case. Unlike others, she felt a connection to the boy she had never met. She walked the path along the park's edge again, hoping for a clue overlooked in the initial chaos. As evening approached, Sarah returned to the precinct, her hope undiminished. She approached Jennings, a question in her eyes that needed no words. The detective met her gaze, his face a mask of determination. "We're not giving up, Sarah. We're going to find him." But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. The city was vast, and Tommy was just a small boy lost in its maze of streets and stories. Yet unbeknownst to him, a piece of the puzzle had been in front of them all along, quietly waiting for its moment to be discovered. The woman who had taken Tommy in watched the evening news, her decision weighing heavily on her conscience. She knew her actions would soon demand answers. As the camera panned over Tommy's smiling face, a promise flickered within her. She would do what needed to be done. But for now, she clung to a fragile peace, the boy asleep in the next room, unaware of the storm brewing outside. As night fell once more, the city held its breath, and the search for Tommy Grayson pressed on. the truth lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to emerge. The morning sun cast long shadows across the precinct as Detective Jennings stared at the board cluttered with photographs and notes, each pinned with the hope of some revelation. The first 48 hours were critical, he knew, but the leads were already growing cold. The phone rang, snapping him from his reverie. It was the chief, demanding updates and expressing the urgency felt from City Hall. Tommy Grayson's disappearance was more than just a missing persons case. It had become a city's collective nightmare. Meanwhile, across town, Tommy's mother, Karen, sat at their kitchen table surrounded by family. Her eyes were red from a sleepless night. They all clung to their cups of coffee, as if warmth alone might bring her boy back. The weight of the phone in the middle of the table was almost palpable, everyone willing it to ring with good news. At the park, the place where Tommy was last seen, Lisa continued her solitary vigil. She approached the groundskeeper, a man whose weathered face spoke of decades spent tending the park's greenery. He recalled seeing a woman he hadn't recognized, someone who didn't fit the usual crowd. His description was vague, but it was the first semblance of a lead they had. Jennings dispatched officers to canvass the area, hoping to find someone who could identify the mysterious woman. As the police retraced Tommy's steps, mistakes began to surface. Witnesses who had seen the boy had not been questioned thoroughly in the initial hours. A nearby store's security camera footage had been overlooked, possibly erased by now. The realization was a bitter pill, highlighting the chaos of those early moments when procedure had faltered. Back at the precinct, the pressure mounted. Sarah, a fellow detective, approached Jennings with a report from the hotline. A call had come in the previous night, an anonymous tip about a boy matching Tommy's description seen in a suburban neighborhood. The caller mentioned a woman with him, a detail that sent a chill down Jennings's spine. The tip had been lost in the shuffle, buried beneath a mountain of less credible ones. With renewed urgency, Jennings dispatched a team to the neighborhood. He and Sarah prepared to join them, fueled by the slimmest thread of hope. The search was on, and the clock was ticking. In the house where Tommy slept unaware, the woman watched the news intently. She knew she had a choice to make. The boy had stirred something within her, a protective instinct she couldn't quite understand. She had taken him in on impulse, driven by a need she couldn't articulate. Now, as the reality of her actions dawned, she realized her time was running out. Her secret would soon be impossible to keep. As the day wore on, the city buzzed with rumors and speculation. Each hour brought new stories, some wild and others grounding, but none with the answers that everyone so desperately sought. The woman tapped her fingers on the armrest, each tap a beat in the rhythm of her indecision. And so, the search for Tommy Grayson continued, each passing moment drawing the lines of tension ever tighter. The first 48 hours were slipping away, and with them the chance of finding Tommy unharmed. But beneath the surface, the truth was beginning to stir, ready to rise when least expected. The precinct was a hive of activity, but beneath the bustling surface, a grim reality set in. The investigation was floundering. Detective Jennings, feeling the weight of each passing hour, reviewed the sparse evidence once more. The hotline tip had led them to a quiet neighborhood, but the search had proved fruitless. No sign of Tommy, no woman matching the description, just empty streets and closed doors. Jennings leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling tiles as if they might offer some revelation. The team had canvassed nearby homes, but people were suspicious, wary. The few who answered had little to offer beyond gossip and conjecture. A child seen playing here, a stranger there, but no solid leads. The neighborhood was tight-knit, protective, and the detective's presence only seemed to deepen the walls of silence. At the same time, whispers began to circulate, fueled by uncertainty and the natural human tendency to fill in gaps with imagination. Some speculated Tommy had been taken by a local recluse, a man with a shadowy past. Others pointed fingers at newcomers, outsiders who had moved into the area recently. The rumors were as varied as they were baseless, each one a dead end in a maze of false hope. The woman watched from her window, aware of the chaos her decision had caused. She had expected this, the storm of publicity, the frantic search. Yet, she had hoped to remain invisible, to provide Tommy with a sanctuary, however temporary. But now, with every passing moment, her resolve wavered. She could feel the net closing in, and she knew she had to act. At the precinct, Jennings and Sarah gathered the team for a briefing. "We need fresh eyes," Jennings declared, frustration edging his voice. "Review every interview, every piece of evidence. We're missing something, and I won't let this case go cold." As the team dispersed, Sarah caught up to Jennings. "What about the woman?" she asked quietly. "What if she's not who we think she is?" Jennings sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's possible, but right now she's our best lead, or she was. We need to find her." Outside, the city moved on, the urgency of the search fading into the background noise of everyday life. But for Tommy's family, time had ground to a halt, each day stretching into an eternity of not knowing. Back in the neighborhood, the woman cradled a decision as fragile as glass. She knew she couldn't hide forever. And as night fell, her mind danced between fear and resolve. She had to protect Tommy. But how? The question echoed in her mind, unanswered. In the precinct, Jennings stared at the map pinned to the wall, red circles marking the search areas, lines connecting points of interest. He felt the pressure of time, the weight of responsibility. The investigation was stalling, but he couldn't let it end here. And so beneath the city's surface, the investigation simmered, the truth still hidden in shadow, waiting to be uncovered. As the clock ticked on, the question remained: who was the woman and what would she do next? In the days that followed, the investigation began to hit a wall. Jennings and Sarah found themselves chasing shadows, every promising lead dissolving into dead ends. The woman who had briefly been in their sights had vanished as if swallowed by the city itself. Her apartment lay abandoned, a time capsule of her brief life with Tommy. Rumors started to swirl in the neighborhood, each more fantastical than the last. Some whispered of a network of underground tunnels, remnants of the Prohibition era, where she might be hiding. Others spoke of a woman with a tragic past, hinting at a story of loss and desperation that led her to take in the boy. Yet no one could provide anything concrete, just echoes of fear and speculation. In the precinct, the frustration was palpable. Jennings called another meeting. "We need to reconsider our suspects," he announced. "There are too many rumors, too much noise. We need clarity." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the faces of her colleagues. "There are whispers about a man," she said hesitantly. "A recluse who lives near where Tommy was last seen. He's known to be different. Maybe we should look into him." Jennings considered this, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. They had to pursue every option, no matter how unlikely. "All right, let's pay him a visit, but keep it low-key." As they drove through the city, the tension in the car was thick. "Do you think we'll find anything?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. Jennings sighed. "I hope so. But honestly, Sarah, I don't know anymore. This case, it's like chasing a ghost." They arrived at a dilapidated house, its windows shrouded in grime. The man inside, a wiry figure with eyes that seemed to pierce through them, insisted he knew nothing of the boy. His answers were curt, his demeanor dismissive. Jennings and Sarah left, no closer to the truth than before. Back at the station, the atmosphere was subdued. The case was slipping through their fingers, the initial fervor waning. Without new evidence, the leads grew cold, and the urgency faded into a painful monotony. For Tommy's family, the agony of waiting was unbearable. Each day stretched into the next, the hope of seeing their son again dwindling. They clung to the belief that the woman had taken him in out of kindness, that somewhere he was safe. Yet the doubt gnawed at them, the uncertainty a constant companion. As the investigation stalled, Jennings found himself staring at the map again, the red circles mocking him in their stillness. "We can't let this go cold," he muttered to himself, determination flickering in his eyes. And so, the city continued its relentless pace, life moving forward even as the past remained unresolved. The truth lay hidden, waiting to be unearthed, but for now it remained just out of reach. The case was slipping into the shadows, and with it, Tommy's chances of coming home. But the clock was still ticking, and somewhere a breakthrough waited. The question lingered: would they find it before it was too late? As the shadows of doubt crept in, Jennings knew they were at a critical juncture. The momentum was waning, and the pressure to find answers bore heavily on his shoulders. The city, with its bustling streets and indifferent skyline, seemed to turn a blind eye to the boy's disappearance. Yet, beneath the surface, whispers began to circulate, fueling speculation and drawing unwanted attention. Rumors spread like wildfire through the neighborhoods. Some whispered of a shadowy figure seen lurking near the schoolyard, a man with a scar across his cheek, known for his unsavory activities. Others pointed fingers at a reclusive couple, recent transplants to the city, who were often seen arguing in hushed tones at the local diner. The community, desperate for answers, latched onto these tales, each one more far-fetched than the last. At the precinct, Jennings and Sarah sifted through the mounting pile of anonymous tips, each one a potential lead, yet none offering tangible evidence. The reclusive couple became persons of interest, largely due to their secretive nature and the mysterious circumstances surrounding their arrival in Chicago. Their names were added to the growing list of suspects. A team was dispatched to interview them, but the couple, though evasive, provided nothing incriminating. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation hit a standstill. The initial burst of activity and hope had given way to frustration and doubt. Jennings, sitting at his desk, buried his face in his hands. The case, once a burning quest for justice, began to feel like an insurmountable wall, each brick a missed opportunity or a dead-end lead. At home, Tommy's parents wrestled with their own torment. The media had taken an interest in their plight, yet each interview and feature only served to remind them of the gaping hole in their lives. They found some solace in the thought that perhaps the woman who took Tommy did so out of compassion. But the absence of any contact or communication left them in perpetual limbo. One evening, as Jennings paced the dimly lit corridors of the station, he was approached by an old acquaintance from the force, a retired detective with a penchant for conspiracy theories. "You ever wonder if this is bigger than it seems? Maybe there's more to this than just a boy disappearing." Jennings paused, considering the suggestion. While he had always been a man of facts and evidence, he couldn't deny the nagging feeling that something crucial was being overlooked. Yet, without concrete proof, these musings were little more than distractions. Returning to his desk, Jennings found Sarah poring over the case files once more. "We need to think outside the box," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion, yet laced with determination. "There has to be something we've missed." Jennings nodded, though his mind was a whirl of uncertainty. The answers felt tantalizingly close, just beyond the horizon of their understanding. But as the days dragged on, they risked losing what little progress they had made. Outside, the city continued its relentless march forward, indifferent to the tragedy that had unfolded within its bounds. The investigation was teetering on the brink of going cold, and with it, the hopes of finding Tommy diminished. Yet somewhere in the vast tapestry of the city, the truth remained hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The question lingered. Could they uncover it before it slipped away entirely? The years drifted by like leaves on a forgotten river, each one carrying with it the quiet erosion of hope. Tommy's parents, Linda and Robert, clung to the fragile threads of their lives, each day a testament to their resilience. The picture of Tommy on the mantel, once a vibrant reminder of his presence, had become a haunting relic of a past they could not reclaim. In the early years, they had hired private investigators, each promising breakthroughs that never materialized. The family poured their savings into these ventures, driven by the desperate belief that the truth was just a phone call away. But every lead dissolved into shadows, and every shadow was a reminder of their profound loss. The neighborhood that had once been a cocoon of familiarity now felt vast and indifferent. Neighbors who had shared in the initial shock and rallied around them slowly returned to the rhythms of their own lives. New residents moved in, unaware of the silent tragedy that lingered in the air, and the local park where Tommy used to play echoed with the laughter of children who had never known him. Linda found solace in routine, her days filled with the relentless cycle of work and home. She kept a journal, scribbling down memories of Tommy, hoping that one day they might share them with him. It was her way of keeping him alive, even as the world seemed to forget. Robert, on the other hand, became a man of few words. He took solace in long walks, his eyes scanning every face, every corner, for a glimpse of the boy who had once clung to his hand. He attended community meetings, often bringing up Tommy's case in the hope that someone might remember something, anything, that could reignite the investigation. Despite the passage of time, Sarah and Jennings never truly let the case go cold. Sarah, now a seasoned investigator, knew that sometimes the smallest detail could unravel the most tangled web. She kept the case files close, revisiting them in search of that elusive thread. Jennings, though officially retired, still felt the weight of unfinished business pressing on his conscience. Meanwhile, whispers of a different kind of life for Tommy emerged in the form of sporadic, anonymous tips, a sighting here, a mention there. Each one was chased down with fervor, only to end in disappointment. The possibility that Tommy had been taken in by someone who cared for him offered a flicker of comfort, yet it was tempered by the uncertainty of his circumstances. As 2 decades slipped by, society's memory dimmed, but the family's pain remained sharp and unyielding. A candlelight vigil marked each anniversary of Tommy's disappearance, a somber reminder of the community's promise never to forget. Yet, with each passing year, the crowd dwindled, and the headlines grew smaller until they faded altogether. In the quiet moments, Linda and Robert would sit together, imagining the life Tommy might be living. Was he happy? Did he remember them? These questions haunted their dreams and colored their days. They held on to hope, not because they had reason to, but because it was all they had left. And then, just as the case seemed all but forgotten, a new voice entered the fray, an eager young journalist inspired by the cold cases of the past, determined to uncover the truth. As she knocked on Linda and Robert's door, old wounds were reopened, but with them came the possibility of finally bringing this chapter to a close. Could this new spark of interest be what they needed to reignite the search for Tommy? The question lingered, tantalizing and terrifying in its promise. The young journalist stood on the porch, a notebook in hand, her eyes filled with a fervor that reminded Linda of days long past, when every phone call might have been the one to bring Tommy home. The journalist introduced herself, her voice steady but laced with empathy, and explained her desire to write a comprehensive piece on the unsolved mysteries of Chicago. Tommy's story, she said, had touched her deeply, and she hoped to bring fresh eyes and renewed interest to the case. Inside, the house was a shrine to their lost son. Photographs lined the walls, capturing fleeting moments of joy that seemed a lifetime away. Linda and Robert listened as the journalist spoke, her words weaving a tapestry of determination and hope. She wanted their blessing, she said, to dig deeper, to ask questions that hadn't been asked, to look in places long forgotten. Robert, whose skepticism had grown over the years, was cautious. They'd been down this road before, with leads that led nowhere and promises that shattered like glass. But Linda, her heart aching with the possibility of closure, saw a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. They agreed to help, sharing what they could, opening doors to memories both cherished and painful. As the journalist delved into the past, she discovered the depth of the family's private investigations. Linda had kept meticulous records, a testament to a mother's devotion. Pages upon pages chronicled tips and clues, sightings and dead ends. Each was a story in itself, a thread in the tapestry that was Tommy's life. The community had moved on. The world kept turning. Yet for Linda and Robert, time had stood still, marked only by anniversaries and the relentless ticking of a clock that offered no answers. Friends who once rallied around them had drifted away, their own lives pulling them in different directions. The annual vigils, once crowded with supporters, had become intimate gatherings, attended only by the most faithful. The journalist's presence reignited a flicker of interest. She interviewed old friends, neighbors, anyone who might hold a piece of the puzzle, however small. The story she wove was one of resilience and heartache, of a family's unyielding love and a community's forgotten promise. But as the months passed and the investigation wore on, the journalist found herself at an impasse. Leads ran dry, and those who might have known something had moved or passed on. The case was as cold as the Chicago winds that swept through the city, yet she refused to give up. In a moment of desperation, she turned to Sarah, now a seasoned investigator with a reputation for never backing down. Together, They pored over the files, searching for anything that might have been overlooked. It was during one of these long nights that a new angle emerged, a whisper from the past that hinted at a secret long buried. As the journalist prepared to follow this new lead, the question loomed large. Could this be the key to unraveling the mystery of Tommy's disappearance? And if she found the truth, what would it mean for the family who had waited so long? The answers lay just out of reach, tantalizing and terrifying in equal measure as the search for Tommy continued. The years drifted by like autumn leaves caught in the wind, each one carrying the weight of unanswered questions and unfulfilled hopes. For Linda and Robert, life became a series of routines, each day a reflection of the one before it, colored only by the faint hope that one day the phone might ring with news of Tommy. They still lived in the same house, its walls lined with pictures of Tommy at every age they could remember. His room remained untouched, a shrine to a life paused in time. Every year on his birthday, they would light a candle and place it on the windowsill, its flickering flame a beacon of their undying love. The world outside continued its relentless march forward. New families moved into the neighborhood, unaware of the heartache that lingered in the air. The children who once played with Tommy grew up, went to college, and started families of their own, their memories of the boy who vanished fading like echoes in a canyon. Linda and Robert's private investigation, a crusade born of desperation and love, became their lifeline. They hired private detectives, consulted psychics, and chased down every rumor that reached their ears. Each lead ended in disappointment, yet their resolve never faltered. They clung to the belief that somewhere, somehow, Tommy was still alive. The journalist and Sarah, driven by a shared determination, continued to search for a thread to pull, a loose end that might unravel the truth. The case files became their Bible, each page a testament to years of futile efforts. But it was in the forgotten corners of the reports, in the overlooked details, that they found their glimmer of hope. One late evening, as they sat surrounded by papers and the soft hum of the city outside, Sarah's eyes fell on a name that had appeared only once, buried in the notes of a long-retired detective, a witness, a woman who claimed to have seen a boy matching Tommy's description, being led away by a stranger. The report was dismissed at the time, deemed unreliable. The journalist felt a chill run down her spine. It was a whisper, barely audible, but it was more than they had found in years. They had to find this woman, if she was still alive, and hear her story firsthand. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. As the journalist and Sarah prepared to track down the witness, Linda and Robert faced another anniversary. They stood together in the twilight, the candle's glow casting long shadows on the walls, and whispered a silent prayer into the night. Unbeknownst to them, the wheels of fate were slowly turning. The community, once apathetic, began to stir as whispers of renewed interest in the case spread. Could it be that, after all these years, they were finally nearing the truth? As the camera pulls away from the candle's flickering flame, a question lingers in the air, as palpable as the chill of a Chicago winter. What secrets does the past hold, and will they finally lead to Tommy? The answers were out there, waiting to be uncovered. Amid the gentle rustle of papers and the dim glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds, Sarah and the journalist embarked on their mission to find the elusive witness. The name from long ago, Mrs. Beatrice O'Connell, was their only lead, a name that had faded into obscurity within the annals of the case. Days turned into weeks as they scoured records, reaching out to nursing homes, community centers, and anyone who might have known her. Then, one afternoon, a call came through. Mrs. O'Connell was indeed alive, residing in a modest retirement community on the outskirts of Chicago. The journalist and Sarah, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, set out to meet the woman who might hold the key to unlocking the mystery. As they entered the quiet corridors of the retirement home, the air was thick with anticipation. Mrs. O'Connell, now in her late 80s, was a frail woman with a sharp mind and a memory that seemed untouched by time. Her eyes, clouded yet piercing, studied them as they introduced themselves. "You're here about the boy, aren't you?" she asked, her voice a blend of curiosity and melancholy. "I never forgot him." With gentle prodding, Mrs. O'Connell recounted that fateful day in 1987. She spoke of seeing a boy who matched Tommy's description, led away by a man she couldn't quite place, a shadowy figure that haunted her dreams for years. Her testimony, once dismissed as unreliable, now carried the weight of possibility. As she described the man, a curious detail emerged, a distinctive scar on his left hand, a scar that could potentially match someone in the long list of suspects once considered. While this revelation reignited their hope, another development unfolded in the background. A new detective, Detective Mark Harlow, had taken a personal interest in cold cases, and Tommy's story had caught his attention. Detective Harlow, known for his meticulous nature and innovative approach, was determined to apply the latest forensic technology to the case, genetic genealogy. In the past, the investigation was hampered by the lack of DNA evidence or the means to analyze it effectively. But times had changed. Detective Harlow believed that by revisiting the physical evidence with advanced DNA techniques, they might be able to generate new leads. He reached out to Sarah and the journalist, eager to collaborate and share any breakthroughs. As the journalist and Sarah absorbed Mrs. O'Connell's account, they received a call from Detective Harlow. His voice echoed with a mix of excitement and urgency. "We've managed to extract a partial DNA profile from an old piece of evidence," he revealed. "It's not much, but it's a start. If we're lucky, genetic genealogy might just give us the break we've been waiting for." The revelation was a turning point. The long-dormant case was beginning to breathe again, each piece of the puzzle slowly sliding into place. As the day faded into night, the question that lingered was no longer if they would find Tommy, but when. The past was reaching out, its secrets ready to be unveiled. And in the quiet corners of Chicago, hope began to stir once more. But as they moved forward, a new question loomed. Who was the man with the scar, and what role did he play in Tommy's disappearance? The race against time had begun, with truth tantalizingly close, yet still just beyond their grasp. The phone call from Detective Harlow was still fresh in their minds, a beacon of hope guiding them through the murky waters of uncertainty. Sarah, the journalist, and Detective Harlow convened in a small, dimly lit conference room at the precinct. The air was thick with anticipation as they prepared to delve deeper into the mystery that had plagued them for so long. Detective Harlow leaned forward, his eyes intense with determination. "The genetic genealogy analysis is underway. We've partnered with a leading forensic lab, and they're combing through databases searching for any familial matches. It's a long shot, but it's our best chance yet." Sarah nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. "What if this leads us to Tommy's family? What if it finally gives us answers?" The journalist, a seasoned investigator himself, chimed in, voice steady. "We need to keep our expectations grounded. Even if we find a match, it could be distant relatives. But it's a start, a connection that could unravel the truth." As they spoke, Detective Harlow's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression shifting from focus to intrigue. "It's the lab," he said, excusing himself to take the call. The room fell silent, the seconds stretching into what felt like eternity. Sarah clasped her hands together, a silent prayer on her lips. The journalist shifted in his seat, eyes darting to the door. Harlow returned, his demeanor a mix of triumph and caution. "We have a potential lead," he announced. "It's not direct, but there's a familial connection. A cousin, possibly. We're verifying the details now." Sarah's mind raced. This could be it, the breakthrough they'd been yearning for. But with every answer came more questions. Who was this cousin? Did they know anything about Tommy's disappearance, or were they as in the dark as everyone else? Detective Harlow continued, "We need to approach this carefully. I'll coordinate with out-of-state authorities to follow this lead. We need to confirm their identity and see if they're willing to talk." The journalist's eyes gleamed with renewed fervor. This could be the story of a lifetime, he thought, not just for the headlines, but for the justice that had been so elusive. As the meeting concluded, the trio left with a shared sense of purpose. Each step forward was a step closer to the truth, and though the path remained uncertain, they knew they were on the brink of something monumental. Outside, the city of Chicago pulsed with its usual rhythm, unaware of the secrets slowly coming to light. The past was no longer content to stay buried, and the present was bracing itself for revelations that could change everything. But even as hope surged, danger lurked. The man with the scar, who was he, and how far would he go to keep his secrets hidden? As they pressed on, the shadows deepened, and the stakes climbed higher. The hunt for Tommy was not just a search for answers. It was a race against a clock they couldn't see, with players they didn't yet know. In the days that followed, Detective Harlow's team worked tirelessly. Their every effort focused on tracking down the familial lead. Phone calls were made, records were scoured, and slowly, a picture began to emerge. But as they moved closer to uncovering the truth, a chilling message arrived, threatening to derail everything. A warning, scrawled in hasty script, left at the precinct's doorstep. Stop looking for him, or else. The atmosphere shifted, the urgency now tinged with danger. Would they heed the warning, or were they prepared to risk it all in the pursuit of justice for Tommy? The clock was ticking, and the choice was theirs to make. The precinct was silent, the weight of the warning hanging heavy in the air. Detective Harlow stood by the window, the crumpled note in hand. He knew this meant they were getting close, too close for someone's comfort. The message was meant to scare them, but it only fueled his resolve. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the city, an unassuming lab was bustling with activity. Dr. Emily Carter, a forensic scientist renowned for her work in genetic genealogy, had been asked to apply her expertise to what little evidence remained from the case. The prospect of unraveling a decades-old mystery through the threads of DNA excited her, and she dove into the work with determination. As she examined the old box of evidence, she found a small envelope containing a few strands of hair, long thought to be useless. In 1987, such evidence was nearly impossible to analyze thoroughly, but now, with advancements in DNA technology, every strand held potential secrets. Back at the precinct, Detective Harlow gathered his team. The warning couldn't be ignored, but it also couldn't be allowed to stop them. They agreed to tighten security and keep their findings under wraps. The stakes were high, and so was the risk, but the potential for a breakthrough was within reach. A few days later, Dr. Carter called with news that set the precinct abuzz. The genetic genealogy had yielded a match, a distant cousin living in a small town in Indiana. It was a tenuous link, but it was the first solid lead in years. This cousin might have information about Tommy's lineage, information that could unravel the mystery of his disappearance and the identity of the woman who had taken him in. Detective Harlow knew they needed to move quickly, but delicately. He reached out to the Indiana authorities and coordinated a visit underlining the sensitivity and potential danger surrounding the case. The last thing they needed was for the man with the scar, whoever he was, to catch wind of their progress. As the team prepared to make the trip, the journalist who had been following the case received an anonymous tip. It was a name that didn't appear on any of the documents or records they've scoured. It was a name whispered in hushed tones, linked to the underworld of Chicago's past. The journalist felt a chill as he scribbled it down, knowing this could be a piece of the puzzle or a path into deeper shadows. The trip to Indiana was fraught with anticipation. Detective Harlow and his team arrived at the modest home of the cousin, hoping for cooperation and leads. The man who answered the door seemed bewildered but willing to help. As they sat at his kitchen table, he shared family stories, piecing together fragments that hinted at a long-buried family secret. Back in Chicago, the journalist was on a different trail. The name he'd been given led him to a forgotten part of the city, a place where secrets were kept and questions were dangerous. He knew he was walking a fine line, but the possibility of uncovering the truth about the man with the scar pushed him forward. As the day turned to night, both Harlow and the journalist found themselves at crossroads. The answers were close, but so was the peril. In Indiana, a photo album lay open, revealing images of a boy who resembled Tommy, while in Chicago, an old ledger hinted at connections that could unravel the entire case. The clock was ticking louder now, each second echoing with the promise of revelation or ruin. Would they find what they were looking for, or would the shadows swallow the truth once more? The past was closing in, and the future hung in the balance. In the dimly lit kitchen, Detective Harlow leaned in closer, his eyes scanning the worn pages of the photo album. Each photograph seemed to whisper secrets of the past, And there, nestled between images of family gatherings and holiday celebrations, was a picture that made his heart skip a beat. The boy in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to Tommy, right down to the playful grin and the curious spark in his eyes. Harlow's voice was steady as he asked the cousin about the boy in the picture. The cousin hesitated, his face a mask of conflict before he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. The boy, he explained, was a relative who had come to live with them under mysterious circumstances. His arrival had been sudden, and his departure even more so, cloaked in silence and uncertainty. Back in Chicago, the journalist followed the trail of the name he had been given. It led him to a small, dimly lit archive room in the basement of an old building, a place where the air was thick with dust and forgotten stories. As he pored over the ledger, he noticed a pattern, a series of names, dates, and transactions that seemed innocuous at first glance but hinted at something more sinister. One name stood out, linked to the underworld activities of Chicago's past, the same name that had been whispered to him. It was connected to a network of individuals involved in human trafficking, a dark web spun across the city in the late 1980s. The journalist's pulse quickened as he realized the significance of his discovery. This network could be the key to unlocking Tommy's disappearance. Simultaneously, Detective Harlow received a call from a forensic expert back in Chicago. They had managed to enhance the image of the scar captured in the old photograph using new technology. The scar was distinctive, a jagged line etched across a man's cheek, a haunting reminder of a violent past. The team cross-referenced the enhanced image with criminal records, and a match emerged. The man with the scar was known to law enforcement, a figure who had slipped through the cracks of justice for years. He was a shadowy presence in the underworld, his name tied to numerous unsolved cases. As Harlow processed this information, a sense of urgency propelled him forward. The pieces were aligning, and the identity of Tommy's abductor was within reach. He knew they had to act swiftly, before the man with the scar could disappear once more into the shadows. In Chicago, the journalist uncovered another layer of the story. The name linked to the scarred man was connected to the woman who had taken Tommy in. She had been a peripheral figure in the network, someone who had seemingly left that life behind. But her ties to the man with the scar suggested otherwise. The revelations were cascading now, each one bringing them closer to the truth. The past was unraveling, and with it, the hope of justice for Tommy. But as answers surfaced, so did new questions. What was the true nature of the relationship between the woman and the scarred man? And how had Tommy become entangled in their web of secrets and lies? The clock continued its relentless march, each tick a reminder of the stakes. The breakthrough was here, and with it the promise of resolution or the threat of deeper shadows. The next steps were crucial, and the path ahead was fraught with danger. Would they finally unmask the killer in plain sight, or would the truth remain just out of reach? The photograph lay on the table, its edges curled from years of neglect, yet the image it held was now a beacon of clarity. The scar on the man's cheek was unmistakable, a testament to a violent history that had finally caught up with him. Harlow, filled with a renewed sense of purpose, gathered his notes and prepared to confront the past head-on. He dialed his contact at the Chicago Police Department, a seasoned detective named Collins, who had been instrumental in reopening cold cases. Collins listened intently as Harlow detailed the findings, the connections, and the implications. The line crackled with tension as they discussed their next move. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit office at the forensic lab, technicians worked tirelessly, cross-referencing DNA samples from the woman who had taken Tommy in. Her name was Jane, a seemingly innocuous figure who had lived quietly on the city's outskirts. But as the lab results came in, a chilling connection emerged. Her DNA was found at multiple crime scenes linked to the scarred man, a revelation that sent shivers down the spine of the investigative team. This breakthrough was more than they had hoped for. It was the key to unraveling the intricate web that had ensnared Tommy decades ago. With this evidence, they could finally pinpoint the scarred man's identity. Robert Lang, a name that had long been whispered in the criminal underworld, but had never been conclusively tied to any one crime. As Harlow and Collins prepared for the next steps, an unexpected lead surfaced. A retired officer who had once worked undercover in the same circles as Lang came forward with crucial information. He had kept meticulous notes from his time infiltrating the network, notes that included meetings, transactions, and, most importantly, names. Lang had used Jane as a cover, a way to blend into society while continuing his illicit activities. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, yet the danger was far from over. Lang was known for his ability to vanish without a trace, and time was of the essence. They needed to act quickly but carefully, to ensure he wouldn't slip away once again. As the sun dipped below the Chicago skyline, casting long shadows over the city streets, Harlow felt the weight of the moment. The investigation had reached a critical juncture. The truth was within their grasp, but so too were the risks. The next move would be decisive. Would they finally confront the man who had haunted so many lives for so long? Or would he remain just out of reach, a ghost in the city's underbelly? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as Harlow and Collins prepared their plan of action. The clock was ticking and every second mattered. The hunt for Robert Lang was on, and with it, the hope that justice for Tommy was finally within sight. As the city settled into the quiet hum of the night, Harlow and Collins sat in the dim glow of the precinct's conference room, their eyes fixed on the retired officer's notes spread across the table. Each line of scribbled text felt like a breadcrumb, leading them closer to the truth. They knew they had no time to waste. The notes were a labyrinth of connections and cryptic references, but one name stood out, a name that had not surfaced before: Eleanor Marsh. She was not just an alias, but a crucial link between Robert Lang's double life and his criminal operations. It appeared she had been his confidant, the one person who knew how deep his secrets ran. Collins leaned forward, his voice hushed but urgent. "If we can find Marsh, we might be able to lure Lang out of hiding. She could be our key to understanding his next move. We need to track her down before he realizes we're closing in." Harlow nodded, their plan taking shape with each passing moment. They would need to delve deeper into Elena Marsh's past, tracing her steps and connections. She was their best chance at predicting Lang's next move and preventing him from vanishing into the shadows once more. Meanwhile, the forensic team worked tirelessly, analyzing the decades-old evidence with the latest technology. A partial fingerprint, overlooked in the initial investigation, had been found on an old photograph of Tommy. Advances in forensic science meant that even this faint print could be run through the national database for a match. As the hours ticked by, anticipation built like a crescendo. The lab buzzed with activity, every technician aware of the high stakes. When the computer finally pinged with a result, the room fell silent. The match was conclusive. Robert Lang's fingerprint was identical to the one on the photograph. The confirmation sent a ripple of excitement through the team. This was the evidence they needed to link Lang directly to Tommy. The net was tightening, and Lang's decades-old cloak of invisibility was beginning to unravel. But just as they prepared to move forward, a chilling realization dawned on Harlow. If Lang caught wind of their progress, he might take drastic measures to cover his tracks. They had to act swiftly, but with precision. One wrong move could send him back into the shadows, where he thrived. With the pieces of the puzzle finally coming together, Harlow and Collins knew they were on the brink of a breakthrough. Yet a nagging question lingered. How had Lang managed to stay hidden for so long? And why had he chosen Tommy that fateful day in 1987? The answers were tantalizingly close, but the path to justice was fraught with peril. As they prepared for the next phase of their operation, a sense of resolve washed over them. They were determined to bring Lang to justice and finally give Tommy and his family the closure they deserved. The stage was set for the final act. But in the world of shadows and secrecy, even the best-laid plans could go awry. The question loomed large and ominous. Would they outmaneuver a man who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of disappearance? The clock ticked ominously in the cramped, dimly lit office as Harlow and Collins pored over the case files one last time. The fingerprint match had been the breakthrough they had desperately needed, but now came the most delicate stage of their mission: apprehending Robert Lang without alerting him to their knowledge. Lang had woven himself seamlessly into the fabric of the community over the decades. To most, he was the kindly owner of a local hardware store, always ready with a handshake and a smile, a man whose life revolved around Sunday church services and neighborhood barbecues. He was the type of person people trusted, someone who would shovel your driveway in the winter without being asked, who remembered birthdays, and who always seemed to know just what to say to lighten a heavy heart. It was this carefully crafted persona that had allowed him to live in plain sight, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Yet beneath this facade lay a chilling reality that Harlow and Collins were now ready to expose. The plan was set in motion with meticulous precision. An unmarked car would tail Lang from the moment he left his house, while another team would secure the perimeter of his store. Meanwhile, Harlow and Collins would approach him directly, armed with the warrant that would finally bring the truth into the light. As dawn broke, the team gathered in silence, their tension palpable. Every detail had been accounted for, but the unpredictability of human behavior meant there was always an element of risk. They had to maintain the element of surprise, hoping to catch Lang off guard before he could slip away like smoke through their fingers. The moment came as Lang stepped out of his store, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. Harlow and Collins approached, their badges flashing in the early light. The look of genuine surprise on Lang's face quickly morphed into a mask of calmness, but not before a flicker of something darker crossed his eyes. "Robert Lang, we have a warrant for your arrest," Harlow said, her voice steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You're being charged in connection with the disappearance of Tommy Carter." Lang's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, the veneer cracked. There was a coldness there, an unsettling detachment that sent a shiver down Harlow's spine. Yet he offered no resistance, merely nodding as he was handcuffed. It was as if he had known this day would come, had perhaps even been waiting for it. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community, disbelief mingled with a sense of betrayal. Neighbors gathered in hushed conversations, trying to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster, now being led away by police. How had they missed the signs? How had he played them all for fools? As Lang was driven away, Harlow and Collins shared a moment of quiet reflection. The arrest was just the beginning. There was still much to uncover, motives to explore, gaps in the timeline to fill, and a family to console. But for the first time in decades, they had the answers they needed, and Lang was finally facing the consequences of his actions. The wheels of justice had begun to turn, but questions lingered, casting long shadows over the newfound clarity. What drove a man like Lang? What had been his endgame? And perhaps most haunting of all, how many more secrets lay buried in the depths of his past, waiting to be unearthed? As Robert Lang sat in the dimly lit interrogation room, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, he remained silent, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the walls. Detectives Harlow and Collins watched him through the one-way mirror, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. They knew this was their chance to finally unravel the mystery that had haunted Tommy Carter's family for over 3 decades. When Harlow entered the room, she carried with her the weight of every unanswered question, every sleepless night the Carter family had endured. She placed a folder on the table, filled with photographs, timelines, and witness statements, each piece of evidence painstakingly pieced together over the years. Lang's eyes flickered briefly to the folder before returning to their distant stare. "Robert," Harlow began, her voice gentle but firm, "we know Tommy came to you that night in 1987. We know you took him in." Lang remained silent, his expression unreadable. "You cared for him, didn't you?" Collins continued, joining Harlow. "You gave him a home when he had none. But something changed. We need to understand why." For the first time, Lang's facade cracked. His eyes met theirs, and there was a flicker of something, regret perhaps, or fear. He took a deep breath, his voice barely a whisper when he finally spoke. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said. "I just wanted to help him. But things got out of hand." Harlow leaned forward, sensing a breakthrough. "What happened, Robert? Why did you keep him hidden all these years?" Lang's eyes filled with unshed tears. "He was scared. I was scared. I thought if I kept him safe it would be enough, but it never was." Hours passed as Lang unraveled his story. He spoke of the fear of losing Tommy, of the misguided attempts to protect him by keeping him away from the world. It was a life lived in shadows, under a cloak of lies that had grown heavier with each passing year. The confession was a bitter-sweet victory, answers at long last, but no solace for the years lost. The trial that followed was swift, with Lang pleading guilty to charges of unlawful imprisonment and child endangerment. The courtroom was filled with an air of somber resolution as the judge pronounced the sentence, decades behind bars for Robert Lang. For the Carter family, the news was a bittersweet relief. In the days following the trial, they visited the small memorial they had kept for Tommy. A quiet place filled with his favorite things, a baseball glove, a stack of comic books, a faded photograph of a smiling boy. They spoke softly, as though he could still hear them, telling him he was finally coming home. The community, too, grappled with the aftermath. Neighbors who had once trusted Lang now questioned their own judgments, their own perceptions. Conversations in living rooms and on street corners turned to introspection and a renewed vigilance for the vulnerable. As the sun set on the final day of the trial, Harlow and Collins stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the case finally lifting. Justice had been served, but the journey had left its mark. They reflected on the fragility of memory, the ease with which truth can be obscured, and the enduring strength of those who seek it. In the end, the story of Tommy Carter was more than just a tale of tragedy and loss. It was a testament to resilience, to the unyielding pursuit of truth, and to the hope that, no matter how deep the darkness, light can always find its way through.